So it's been another interesting week in video games. We've got some updates on stuff we've talked about. We're going to look at China's new draconian rules on kids gaming. So let's get into it. Hi, I'm Prob.
And I am Rob.
And welcome to News Trash, where we take an extended look at the more interesting happenings from the last 7 days from the world of video games.
Yeah. And it's not horrible, which is the first time in a while, which is just nice. It's nice.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're jumping straight into it with games that are going to be released. On Tuesday, we have Sonic Colors Ultimate for those sadists who still play Sonic games. And there's Fist, Forged in Shadow's Touch. Forged in Shadow's Torch.
That's not a good name for a game.
Awful name. Fist is a terrible acronym because it's dirty, and it doesn't get any better when you break it down. And the irony is, it looks okay. Actually looks okay. On Thursday, there's The Artful Escape on PC and Xbox. Other highlights that day is The Tourist, which apparently is the first game to be going in 8K on PlayStation, because apparently it can do that. And on Friday, there is Life is Strange True Colours, Tales of Arise, WarioWare NBA 2K gambling game, because that's what they are. And the game that we want to highlight is Lost in Random, which is from EA and Zoink, and on every platform under the sun.
It does look good, though.
It's that sort of neo-gothic stuff, which I really like. You're talking about medieval, you're talking about very Tim Burton sort of style to it. And it's by Zoink, and Zoink did Stick It to the Man, which I adore. So the studio, they also did FE quite recently. They're a studio which have a style which they don't really have. They're a studio for hire, but their style is so diverse and the type of games they do are so diverse. But it'll always have this quirky, different sense of humour and sense of presentation, which I really, really like. And Lost in Random is just basically seems like a card playing game. So you have a deck, got to negotiate your way through this world and rescue your sister.
The art style, immediately when I saw the game, do you remember Gregory Horror Show and stuff like that on the PlayStation 2? It reminded me of games like those, or Grim Grimoire on the PS3.
The highlighted release this week is Lost in Random, but it's a very strong week kickstarting video games coming out again after the wasteland is the summer. Right, anyway, let's do some news.
We've got some updates on things that have been happening. Now, everyone is aware of Epic versus Apple and Epic versus Google, but what a lot of people probably have forgotten is the reason for Epic versus Apple and Epic versus Google, which is all to do with third-party payment applications on these walled environments on iOS and Android, especially when it comes to things on the Play Store and the App Store. And one of the main points of Epic's lawsuit is that they wanted to have a third-party payment system for Fortnite on iOS. And Apple didn't want that because it would cut into their 30% profit margin, right?
Yeah. So
now countries are actually getting involved in this. And there was a story that came out from America about a law that they were trying to pass about these walled environments, allowing third-party payment systems. South Korea has basically become the first country to prevent App Store owners like Apple and Google from forcing their developers to use their specific billing and payment systems. They've basically banned Apple and Google blocking third-party payment systems, which is really good news for Epic in terms of their lawsuit. If you look at the PC system, right, you don't just have Steam as the place where you can get video games from for the PC, yeah?
Yeah.
You have other options like GOG, you have Epic Game Store, you have Amazon Games, you have all sorts of other things, yeah? Well, here's the thing. I'm curious what this would mean for something like Sony, because Sony is basically a walled garden.
So is Microsoft and Nintendo.
When I say Sony, I'm kind of including Nintendo. Microsoft to a lesser degree, but yeah, on the Xbox, yes, definitely. But to a lesser degree because they also run Windows, and Windows has multiple ways of buying games. But for Xbox and for PlayStation and for Nintendo, yes, definitely. What does this mean for them? moving on, a day off Twitch. This was an interesting thing that Twitch streamers were trying to do. They were taking a day off Twitch because they were demanding protection against hate raids against smaller Twitch streamers. And I applaud the fact that they were willing to take some action against the company itself for not protecting people from these hate raids. Now, according to Twitch tracking suite Sully Gnome, September the 1st saw 57 million viewer hours watched that day, which in comparison with Wednesdays in the previous month, saw a 61 to 65 million hours watched, putting the viewership decline between 7 and 12%, which is not a bad number. It's not as high as maybe people like ourselves have hoped.
It just shows how diverse Twitch is, honestly. There's a lot going on out there, and it gets very fractured. And the narrative behind one part of Twitch isn't the narrative behind another part of Twitch, so the message gets buried.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people lose sight of is Twitch doesn't just deal with video games. There are streamers who deal with all sorts of things on Twitch, and it is very much like your standard network TV thing. So having that kind of drop, in some cases, they're recording around an average of around a 10% drop, which is a big number when you're talking about this sort of thing, but not as big as I think a lot of people hoped. Hopefully Twitch have paid attention and will start doing something. We'll see. We'll keep an eye on this. So, moving on to the ongoing chip shortage. Now, it's a thing that a lot of people are aware of now, maybe around the edges when it comes to console gaming, but when it comes to PC gaming, you're very, very, very much aware of the chip shortage.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if you wanted a new graphics card.
It's not as bad as it used to be because of the cryptocurrency. The bottom has fell out of that, and it's a bit...
Yeah.
It's not as aggressive as it used to be.
Yeah. Well, Toshiba have sounded a bit of an alarm about this and have said that the supply of chips will remain very tight at least until September next year. So that means that we're not really going to see the price of things change that much over the next 6 months.
Yeah, it's just going to be a constant fight.
Yeah, it's going to be a constant fight as things get slowly better and better and better. It has been a struggle for a lot of people when it comes to upgrading their PC. And when it comes to new things that are coming out, like the Steam Deck, it's been a struggle for Valve to actually make them in the first place. And I think that's one of the reasons why they did their action against scalpers. We know the effect it's had on console sales, because Sony and Microsoft struggled to keep up with demand for the PS5 and the Series X and S. Nintendo, they made it clear that they believed they could source resources that they needed for manufacturing, but there is still uncertainty that they'll be able to fully keep up with demand for the Switch, especially when the new Switch OLED comes out. Moving on to China. Now, China recently stopped kids, especially, playing games for more than, say, 3 hours a day. Now they've reduced that. China have banned minors from playing games during the week. Well, they haven't banned them specifically. They've severely reduced how long they can play games for. The regulation will only permit children to play an hour of games a day from Friday through Sunday.
I mean, it's really bad for people who spend all of their day underground, digging for coal and digging for all sorts, and now, they come home and they want to play some video games, and then China won't let them.
No. Kids. Oh,
yeah, no, that was the joke.
That went right over my head, you smart ass.
But yeah, this is really bad, honestly. And they can get away with this stuff because of the software systems that are in place, and it's much harder to make an account for something in China than it is in other parts of especially in the Western world. So this isn't something you can easily circumvent. You can get around it, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Tencent have got facial recognition software on their games in China, and you have to register a games account in China with your real name. It won't let you play games otherwise. So you need things like your social security number and stuff like that to register your account in order to play games.
It's not the worst thing in the world, honestly. I think it would prevent a lot of the poison if that was what was required.
Yeah, I mean, there is a space.
You get rid of the anonymity and the people aren't so willing to be foul. But this is taking that way too far the other way.
Yeah, it's taken it to the extreme. And I kind of think that you shouldn't prevent kids from playing games, at least give them time. okay, mandate how long they can play games for, and say, okay, you can play an hour's worth of games a day, but make sure these things are done first, and that's the parents' responsibility. That I could accept. But banning them completely from playing games from Monday to Thursday, and then only allowing them to play an hour of games Friday through Sunday, I think is quite draconian. I think it's quite extreme.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
I mean, anything else that we could say about this is basically it'd return to that point, and we would reiterating that point, but with different wording.
Yeah.
It's just bad, and it's backwards. And it just shows that for all the progression that China are doing, they're still China.
Yeah. And I don't understand this, because once you're 18, you're allowed to play video games as much as you want.
Yeah.
And I think that in itself is going to be more dangerous than anything else.
Yeah, there's a fracture in China between the young, sort of progressive thinking people and the old, not necessarily old, but the old conservative ways. It's happened with Japan. Japan is, I think 98% of the people in Japan are Japanese born. It's one of the most homogenized societies on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And there's this thing happening where a lot of the young people don't want to stay there. They want to go around the world and do different things and meet different people, which is why there's as much as people who love anime think Japan is like the greatest place in the world and all want to be there is a massive fracture there.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to happen sooner or later in China too.
The thing is,
but this is getting political, so I don't want to dwell on this too much, but it is something which underpins this story.
One of the problems that you have in Japan is declining birth rates, and it's the same in South Korea.
Mm.
And one of the problems that's kind of a result of one of the problems that you're talking about, which is the divide between older people and younger people.
Yeah.
Because younger people basically, Japan has the very, very formal structure. China is the same. South Korea is the same. Now South Korea's opened itself up a bit more, and so they're starting to stabilize a bit. Japan is starting to head that way as well. But that's because the younger people basically all but rebelled against the older people, and that's something that I can see happening in China in a big way.
Yeah.
If the people at the top don't loosen up a little bit. Anyway, moving on to Naughty Dog, and apparently, according to Kotaku anyway, their bosses still don't get it.
Well, it's not that according to Kotaku. There's a specific quote where he was asked, Evan Gold, I don't know, what's his name?
Evan Wells.
Evan Wells and Neil Druckmann were interviewed. They were interviewed by Game Informer, and they were asked about crunch.
Yeah.
And they basically avoided the answer altogether and said, when they were questioned about unionisation, said, I've not thought about unionisation whatsoever. And the entire internet went, are you kidding? You've basically just buried your head in the sand, and Naughty Dog were getting a lot of flack because of their crunch. Yeah. And not just crunch, I mean, in a normal job, you will be asked to work, like, when it's like a little busy period, you'll be asked to work, like, late nights sometime, like long days. But you make it up elsewhere. But in the video games industry, for a long time, it was expected that you could work weeks on end, working 50, 60-hour weeks, unpaid overtime. And with answers like that, it seems that Naughty Dog haven't really addressed the issue at hand here. It's very evasive.
Yeah, it's very evasive.
It reflects on Naughty Dog quite badly.
I mean, when you look at the numbers, Uncharted 4, right? 70% of the non-lead designers left the studio.
That's a big rate. That's a horrible employee retention rate, that.
Yeah, considering the typical industry turnover rate is 15%, 1.5, right? 70% is ridiculous. And if you've lost, imagine you're the boss of a development studio and you walk in on a Monday and literally half of your development team have walked out.
Spitballing here. I think the reason why games development might be costing so much is because of the constant employment, the constant recruitment, the constant having to restaff. That's not a cheap process.
No, it's not a cheap process.
And then it drives, the running costs drive up the production costs. And the production costs have to keep on going up and up because they have to keep on restaff and retool. And then you get studios making these ridiculous statements like, it costs more to make a game. What's the problem here? Oh no, it's not crunch, it's the industry. Things cost more. But you look deeper, and it's little things like this which have roll-on effects, have snowballing effects.
I'm going to make a weird comparison here, right, just based on this, before we move on with this. But I worked in Asian restaurants for many, many years, right? Indian restaurants in particular. And one of the things that I noticed from there is that a lot of the Indian restaurants here in the UK, they have a very particular way of operating. A very particular way. They don't really care about front of house staff or kitchen staff or anything like that. It's all about how much money can I put in my pocket. Not about how can I serve the customer, how can I, do better food or anything like that. Yeah. The ones that are owned by chefs themselves who've been trained, they have a way of doing it. And it suddenly struck me, based on what you've just been saying, that that's the way video games developers work. They basically start their own development studio based on how they've learned to run a development studio from other companies that they've worked at, which is not how you run a business, but that's all they've known. That's how they grew up in video games, learning to do it that way.
I learned it that way, so that's how it'll always be.
Do you see what I mean? And it's a weird parallel, I know, but you see that in other industries, and most of those businesses, unfortunately, fail.
Naughty Dog are too big to fail, but yeah.
Yeah. As a part 2 of this story, the Last of Us, the director of Last of Us, Neil Druckmann, saying that we stand by the game we made despite all of the criticism.
The choices that they're made, the creative choices that they're made, basically alienated huge parts of the audience. And I don't mean the part of the audience who need to be alienated, the ones who think that a woman has muscles, a woman, no, not interested. It's the more basic storytelling devices there alienated a lot of people. And me in particular, I used to think that I will get every Naughty Dog game because they sort of have the golden touch. But this is, for me, it's creatively like what CD Projekt Red did. CD Projekt Red were untouchable, and, they could do no wrong, and then they cyberpunked it. Naughty Dog, they were untouchable, and then they did a story which I have no interest in ever experiencing, and it's going to make me second guess every Naughty Dog game going forward, because I don't think they're quite as the golden child as they're presented as. And for him to say there's no regrets, it's kind of a bit tone deaf.
Yeah, for me, I've not been that way with video game development studios or publishers ever. And I think part of that is because I've been burned by the anime studios far too many times. Yeah. So I have no faith in any of these creative teams. I used to have complete confidence in an anime studio called Manglobe until they made a show called The Sacred Blacksmith. And then I thought, right, I'm done with you. But yeah, I apply that to video games in general. So
that is the mentality that a lot of people have now. They are questioning everything that Naughty Dog do.
Yeah, and this is the thing. I think it's right to question it. Me, with The Last of Us 2, I did not like The Last of Us 2 for a number of reasons, and all of them have to do with the way the story is told.
It's, to me, if I'm going to sum it up in a sentence, it's very juvenile, but with a very dark and broody hat on.
Yeah, as a 45-year-old man, I don't really need that. I don't need a game to patronise me and lead me around by the nose. Abby's story should not have been included in The Last of Us Part 2. It's a completely separate thing and derails the idea of the game completely.
But there's a lack of self-awareness that's absolutely rampant in Naughty Dog. I think that's the byproduct and the result of that interview. They might have done it as a means to be PR, but the result is they are absolutely oblivious to their role and their responsibilities as a company.
I'm just going to throw this out there, right? If The Last of Us Part 2 had been taken to a publisher, for example, before it even got made as a game, if someone had taken the story of The Last of Us 2 to a publisher, the publisher would have probably sent them away saying, rewrite the whole thing, separate this story from this story, you got two different stories here, and this is far too patronising. But it feels like that hasn't been done with the story in The Last of Us 2. Nobody's actually done any QC on it. Naughty Dog have that standalone multiplayer thing coming up, don't they?
Yeah, they do. They're putting a lot of money into it, it seems. Sort of a cinematic multiplayer.
Yeah, and I heard they've really ramped up like the hiring process for that.
They have.
Curious to see how that turns out, given their turnover rate for staff.
It smells of live service, but
yeah,
not just me. That's predictions.
Sorry, that's a different Nirvana song. Smells like live service.
Yeah.
Shawn Layden has finally revealed. Well, I say revealed why he left Sony, or Sony PlayStation in particular.
Yeah, this is actually little tease for an upcoming impossible mission we have. Because what he said basically is he wanted to go out on top. Horizon and God of War especially, is him going out on a high.
Yeah.
And he basically alluded to the fact that video games are a young man's game, a young man's world.
Yes.
And the time was right for him to jog on.
Yeah, which is curious because Jim Ryan is older than Shawn Layden.
He is. But he's a young man at heart, Rob. Said nobody ever about Jim Ryan, but sure.
Personally, I think that Shawn Layden saw the direction that Sony PlayStation were heading in and thought, okay, this is a good time for me to leave. My legacy is basically intact here. I'm going out on a high, and I can see them causing controversy or maybe losing a lot of fans because of some of the decisions they're going to make in the near future.
Well,
now's a good time.
That's just you guessing.
That's me guessing, yeah. But at the level he was at, he would have known things that we're not privy to.
Yeah, I think it's just generally in video games that he saw what direction games are going in, and he thought, I don't really think that is my world, so the time is good now. Let's get out.
Yeah.
Get out of Dodge while I can. But yeah, it's sad really, because I thought as a personality to lead him, a company, Shawn Layden was about as good as you could possibly imagine. He's up there with Phil Spencer and Reggie, honestly. And they replaced him with a corporate guy, and it's not been the same since. But these eras have to end. The Jim Ryan era will end. These things happen.
Anyway, THQ Nordic, they're going to be doing a showcase on September the 17th on YouTube, Twitch, and Steam. And it's going to be hosted by Jeff Keighley. And it's going to include 6 new game announcements. And THQ Nordic have said that this month will see the return of legendary franchises.
Now, there's ways to read this. You could say, is it THQ franchises? Maybe. Yeah. But they didn't specify, did they? So it could be from any part of gaming culture. There's many, many franchises that have gone untouched for a long time. And THQ have always, they've not been sort of AAA, they've not been bleeding edge, they've always been franchises that have been overlooked.
Yeah. Well,
so I'm assuming maybe it might be a franchise that another company owns and they've lost interest, and maybe THQ have picked up the license to take on those games. Well, that's my thinking anyway.
There's that, but there's also the other thing as well. See, THQ Nordic don't exist in a vacuum. They are part of Embracer Group, and Embracer Group also own Deep Silver.
Yes.
Now, both THQ Nordic and Deep Silver are sister companies in Embracer Group, and they have a lot of IP between the two of them. So it's entirely feasible that Embracer Group from on high can say, okay, right, move this one from Deep Silver over to THQ Nordic, move this one from them over to Deep Silver, and move things around from on high. And that is an entirely possible thing that they could do. On their own, THQ Nordic own like 19 development studios or something like that with all of the IP.
They're a fairly big company, THQ Nordic, yeah.
With all of the IP that comes from there, stuff like Bugbear Entertainment and Gunfire Games, Handy Games and Piranha Bytes, Rainbow Studios, and all those. Lots. There's a lot of stuff that they've got there. I found a list of THQ Nordic games, and it is a ridiculous list. I mean, this list just goes on and on and on, and you've got stuff like Imperium Galactica and Super Dungeon Brothers, Broken Age, Siberia. This is just me scrolling up the list in general and picking names out of the hat, quite literally. Diblob 2, Battle Chasers, Lock's Quest, the Raven, Legacy of a Master Thief. There are so many games, and when I was looking at this story, I thought, I wonder what IP THQ Nordic actually have, because I'm curious, what legendary franchises are they talking about? Just like anyone would be. So I went looking to see if I could figure out what it was, and you know what? I got lost in the maze of games. One of the games that they teased back in 2019 was a game called Gothic, and I've always been a big fan of the Gothic franchise. Yes. And they did like a playable teaser for it, which wasn't really that great, but I was willing to give it a go, and that's basically because I have fond memories of playing Gothic 1, 2, and 3 back in the day. So I would have loved to have seen more of that, but then the pandemic happened and everything kind of went out the window.
But also, just sort of an addendum to this, they've announced that they're going to be a PlayStation conference on Thursday.
Yeah.
And there's the expectation that God of War is going to get an announcement trailer, a proper announcement trailer, rather than a teaser there, which is fine. It's going to be 40 minutes, and there's going to be stuff there, new stuff. There's been suggestions that there's going to be some big things to look forward to, but I don't hold that sort of commentary with any value.
Anyway, moving on. Lost Judgment. There's things happening with that game that, with the voice acting side of things, there's been problems with the...
It's not so much voice acting, it's actor likeness.
Yeah, actor likeness, I should say. There's been problems with the likeness of Takuya Kimura, who is the likeness of the lead role.
Yagami,
in Lost Judgment. Now, his talent agency are not going to be okay with the release of the PC because, the previous... And that's even though the previous game was released on Stadia, the issue appears to be a proper PC release and how that would impact the talent agency's management of Kimura's likeness and a general dislike of a PC-based platform, which is a big problem in Japan. We kind of shrugged it off a little bit. I didn't kind of think because I'm more familiar with how talent agencies and things like that in Japan are, having seen the voice acting community from the anime side of things and the idol side of things.
However, it seems like with the DLC, which is going to be released in 2022, they found a solution. They're going to be... it's going to focus on... A lot of stories have described him as his sidekick. People who describe him as a sidekick haven't played the game.
Yeah.
Is his partner, his business partner, Kaito, who has a somewhat Kiryu thing about him.
Yeah.
So, I'm looking forward to that, and it's a good way to solve this situation, honestly. Give Kaito the game.
Yeah, it's a really good way of solving the situation. The creator of Yakuza, he's basically left Sega now. Toshihiro Nagoshi has gone to work at NetEase, and I've always been curious as to why Yakuza didn't actually have other Yakuza in. And so I've always been curious as to why franchises where it would be easy to focus on different characters each game, why they always only focus on one.
That was the plan with Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween. He was wanting to make movies all set of Halloween, telling a different story, but Michael Myers was too popular, so that became what the Halloween franchise was.
Yeah.
And maybe Yakuza was the same, but maybe Lost Judgment, that's what they're sort of readdressing the franchise to be in the future. Who knows?
Yeah, because, I'm sure there are plenty of private eye stories that you could tell, in various locations in Japan.
Yes, 100%.
And all of them could fall under the Judgment franchise. I'd love to be... I'd be interested in that. Different characters, different scenarios, it'd be great. Moving on to a bit of an interesting one, this one. I know that Riot Games are being investigated for other things, but one of the things about Riot Games is that even though League of Legends is really popular, it seems like Riot Games have made League of Legends just so they can make music videos and animated shorts based on the characters in the game, right? And now they've hired a former Netflix executive to help them with their entertainment side of things, to develop their entertainment division.
Yeah, it's always curious to me how when video games companies become so big, they automatically think they can make TV and movies.
Yeah.
And this seems like that is happening with Riot Games too.
Yeah. And the person they've hired is a gentleman called Brian Wright. He was hired as Chief Content Officer for the company, and he looks to grow the new entertainment division. According to reports, Wright's main duties are to help create new projects for film, TV, and animation at Riot Entertainment.
Yeah, this is going to be weird and awkward. And the translation between video game property and movie property is, it's not a good one. There's not a lot that's really came out of it which you'd call good content as a serialized bit of TV or movies.
See, that's the thing. From our perspective, that would be the case. But from League of Legends players, that's not the case, because for years, they've had animated music videos. They've had their own bands. I mean, there's pop stars who basically work for Riot Games. There was a bunch of them. I think the most recent one was this KDA thing, who basically were topping Korean charts with these animated music videos with these characters from League of Legends in them.
As somebody who loves my music, absolutely loves it, I've got one word for all of that. Ew. 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 Ugh.
All I'm saying is, I think that Riot are catering to a very, very particular fandom, and I think those fans will lap up everything that they produce. So they probably will make money.
It's a very corporate vision of art, having, studio and video game associated bands. That's really quite an ugly vision of the future. Just to expand upon my ew.
It's so manufactured. I've listened to a couple of the KDA songs, and they're so manufactured. Moving on to Rise of the Tomb Raider. Apparently, the Xbox exclusivity for Rise of the Tomb Raider was worth around $100 million.
Doubt they made that back.
Yeah. I mean, that's a shocking amount of money to pay for a game exclusive, especially when you're not guaranteed to make the money back.
Especially when you don't have much of an install base, which they didn't at that time.
Yeah.
That's just throwing money in the wind, that.
Yeah. And Tomb Raider, Rise of the Tomb Raider in particular, isn't a console seller.
No, it's not. It's not in the slightest. Nice game to have. It's a good game, but I'm not going to say, Xbox has Rise of the Tomb Raider. I'm getting an Xbox. This Xbox has got Rise of the Tomb Raider for a while. Well, just wait. Doesn't matter.
And if
most people are going to treat it like that.
Yeah. If it was something like Mass Effect and it was exclusive to Xbox.
Yes.
And it was like a new Mass Effect game that, nobody had ever played before, and it was coming out specifically for Xbox.
The obvious one is Bethesda. Fallout and Starfield, that's been in the news. This isn't the story, it's just a reference that has been in the news because they've had to reiterate again that it is an Xbox exclusive.
Yeah.
That'll sell machines.
Yes, it will.
Tomb Raider, no. It's not what it used to be in sort of reputation. And
it's a crazy thing to think about that this amount of money is being paid for timed exclusives. And it's not just Microsoft that have done this. Epic also did the same thing with Gearbox for timed exclusivity on the PC for Borderlands 3. 115 million.
They're just throwing money around like it means nothing.
Anyway, moving on. I'm not sure how to process this. Death Stranding is apparently getting a sequel.
Well, maybe negotiating it. Norman Reedus hinted at a Brazilian interview. Yeah, we'll see. If they completely reinvent what the game is, I can see them getting more games out of it. But if it's just more moving parcels around, no. I don't think there's a lot more you could do with that, honestly.
Well, I don't know. I mean, let's be fair. Lake looks like an attractive game.
But it's not 70 hours long.
It's not.
It'd be about 8.
But maybe this time there's going to be roads for Norman Reedus to drive on. Maybe he's going to have like a proper uniform instead of wearing all this technical stuff. Oh, sorry, this
and
technical
maybe there'll
stuff.
be 2 playthroughs you can do. One is him and the other one is Kevin Costner. Because that's a reference to the Postman.
Yeah, just make sure the little boy is positioned perfectly on the side of the road and is holding it up so that as you ride by, you can grab it. Moving on to an interesting one here, because Nintendo have announced that their vast back catalogue is actually coming to the Switch Online. Well, certain games from it anyway. It's going to be like a Game Pass for really old games. It's granting players access to more than 100 games from the NES, the SNES, and a few other things. And there's whispers about the addition of Game Boy games that might be also included in this Game Pass type thing for Nintendo, which is an interesting thing to a lot of people because a lot of the Game Boy games, especially the classic games for the Game Boy, you just cannot play anywhere else.
Okay.
And so that's going to be good news for fans of Game Boy games. And I'm a fan of Game Boy games. And speaking of the Game Boy, the first commercial Game Boy Advance game in 13 years smashed its Kickstarter target in less than a day. It's a game called Good Boy Galaxy. And they were asking for £18,000. And at the time of recording, they've basically been pledged £135,068.
Well, they're going to make much more of a game than they thought they were.
Yeah, it looks like your typical kind of Game Boy Advance game, but one of the interesting things about these sorts of games that come out long after the console's been
there was one
dead
recently for the Mega Drive as well, like a year or two ago.
Are you on about Piasola?
I don't know what it was called, but there was one where they did it for the Mega Drive, and it was years after the fact.
Yeah, there was a game. There's a game that came out for the Mega Drive called Piasola, which is a very, very tough game, and they did a remake of it. There's one called Nightmare Busters for the SNES, which is a bizarre game, and this is kind of continuing that tradition of people making games for consoles that are basically all but dead.
Which is nice.
And yeah, I like the fact that these consoles are kind of being kept alive in that way.
Agreed.
Yeah, finally, something weird that happened in the video games world. So, Grand Theft Auto 6. Everyone is curious when Grand Theft Auto 6 is going to come out. Yeah?
Never, because they make too much money with Grand Theft Auto Online.
Yeah. Anyway, on a recent episode of the German show Schlag den Star, a fan rushed onto the stage to demand updates about Grand Theft Auto 6. Now, this was live TV, and he's run up onto the stage, stood in between the presenters, and gone, ask them, look at the camera and ask them where Grand Theft Auto 6 is. We want to know. Scream it at the camera. He's like, and the presenter's like, I haven't even finished playing 5 yet.
Yeah, it's a mistaken identity, honestly. That's what it was all about. Because the guy had a history of voice acting roles.
Yeah.
And this guy who ran on has got completely the wrong end of the stick of who he is.
Yep.
And he's demanding an answer to a question he doesn't even know about, which is curious.
It's a bizarre situation to find yourself in, that somebody is demanding you to answer for something that you have no knowledge of.
But it just goes to show the amount of anticipation and hunger there is for GTA 6.
Yeah. So, I don't know, maybe Rockstar will see that and go, maybe we should give them something.
Well, the announcements always come out of nowhere, so we'll see what happens.
Anyway, hang on. They're already giving us something. They're giving us remakes of Vice City and San Andreas, aren't they?
It's basically keep quiet money.
Yeah, exactly.
They're bribing you to keep quiet with those things. So anyway, Trailer Trash is what we're ending on.
Yes, you picked this one. Children of Silentown, which is a dark adventure game that tells the story of Lucy, a young girl growing up in a village deep in a forest inhabited by monsters. People are disappearing, and it's not something uncommon in the village, but this time Lucy is big enough to investigate on her own, or so she thinks.
Yeah, the twist of the trailer here is that humans, pitchfork-carrying, paranoid humans, are the bad guys, and the monsters are the good guys, and I think that's a genuinely quite sweet twist on the convention. And it has a odd look about it, which I don't think I can really pin down or place in a style or a genre.
I like this idea of monsters living in the forest being the good guys, but then again, I like things like that where they kind of turn logic on its head.
Alright, so that's all we have time for this week. A bit of a longer episode, but lots of news to get through. If you like what we do, please do subscribe. Please do like the video. Comment below if you have any comments to add on any of the stories that we talked about or any of the trailers that we covered. If you like us even more and you enjoyed it even more, you can get involved with our Patreon. And one of the things that has just went live recently is a episode of our Pop Screen podcast, which looks at pop stars in movies. And it's a documentary about Blur from 1993. Blur, that's Damon Albarn's band. I said it weird, I know. People on screen right now also are contributors to our Patreon, and we appreciate each and every one of you. And thank you for supporting us. You mean a great deal to us, each and every one of you. And we'll be back next week with more news and more trash.